welcome to our Mental Health Americas of Hawaii Brown Bag Seminar on Autism, Putting the Pieces Together. My name is Maria Grams. I'm the director of MHA, and I'd like to tell you just a quick list of things that we do as an organization. We have a helpline open every day for people to call who need help finding help. And so that's what we do on our helpline. It's not necessarily a crisis line, but it's for people who need resources and can't find them. We also have a very major youth suicide and bullying prevention program, which has trained over 10,000 people throughout the state. And we're now doing a training for trainers, so we're going to now have 60 more people being able to do those trainings. We have a program called Grow a Rainbow, which is to develop safe spaces for lesbian and gay kids, LGBT. We've just completed 3 years of working with homeless female veterans. We have a training program called Invisible Children, which is for children who have adults with mental illness or their parents. And we have a program called Live Your Life Well, which is for employees in the workplace for mental wellness and stress reduction. So we have some fabulous panelists here today. I'd like to welcome our moderator, Leolinda Parlin. She is the state coordinator for Family Voices of Hawaii. She's the director of the Hilopa'a Family to Family Health Information Center, and she's an adjunct professor in the Department of Pediatrics at the UH Medical School, and she's received a number of awards for her community work. She's also the parent of a young adult who has autism. So Leolinda is going to be moderating today, so welcome Leolinda.
Aloha and good afternoon. It's so wonderful to see you all today. As a parent, I am always humbled by the fact that there are people out there that would actually want to talk about my kid or talk about our other kids. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, is living and loving and autism and putting those pieces together. As we launch off our presentation today, I kind of want to ground us in all things that are autism. The Center for Disease Control tells us that Autism and Developmental Disabilities Monitoring Network that the prevalence rate of autism is 1 in 88. So that's the number that we go by. We know it's 5 times more common in boys than in girls, and over half, at least 62% of individuals, do not have an intellectual disability. And last but not least, a strong genetic relationship showing increased identification in siblings, and in particular twins. So kind of giving you that 80,000-foot network about what we're talking about, we want to start our discussion today by turning it over to our first question to Dr. Bolman. Dr. William Bolman is an icon in Hawaii as in all things related to autism. We lovingly call him the grandfather of autism because, being a practitioner and one of the very first child psychiatrists in Hawaii, having previously trained on the East Coast in Harvard and coming back here in Hawaii, when the Children's Hospital was on Kokini Street. Some of you may remember, some of you have seen pictures. But really, in over his 50 years of service to the community, whether it's through WHO as a scholar or just serving the thousands of families and youth, he has a perspective that crosses generations, crosses research, and crosses his understanding. There's no one else in the state that has a greater understanding and firsthand experience, and so we wanted to start off with him. So Dr. Bolman, as you've seen the prevalence change and the increase in identification and the ability of having more and better diagnostic tools, as well as our community having a larger awareness of what autism is and is not, can you just really help us set the framework today of our discussion to share with us, in layman's terms, what autism is or is not?
The problem with autism is that there really is not a specific thing called autism. Autism is a word like fever or rash or the weather, stuff like that. It's simply a general category of kids whose brains work differently. It started as a specific term because there was a child psychiatrist in Baltimore named Leo Connor who saw, half a dozen kids, and they were all the same, and nobody had seen anything like it before, so he gave it a label called autism. And then a year later, another guy named Hans Asperger, saw a few more kids who were kind of odd but not as impaired as the ones that Leo Connor had seen. And so they got named after him. But still, it was an extremely rare, kind of exotic condition. I was a resident in psychiatry at Boston State Hospital in 1957. And I know that we had at the state hospital some kids with autism, but we thought they had schizophrenia or some other weird thing. And people talked about refrigerator mothering and junk like that. It just goes to show what a long time ago all of that was. But anyway, autism didn't start to get much attention until around 1990. And that's when things really took off, and it's been a steadily upward curve. It went from something like 3 per 10,000 to, like 5 per 1,000 and then 1 per 1,000 and then all the way down. The most recent figures, some of you may have heard, is 1 in 38. The figure that the Americans are happy with is 1 in 88. But this 1 in 38 figure was done by the Yale Child Study Team, which is one of the country's top groups. And they did it in Seoul, Korea, with a middle class community. Anyway, so we're going to have to wait a few years before people get around to that. So anyway, the point I'm trying to get at is that autism really is a brand new social phenomenon that people really haven't seen before. And it affects one of the most, intimate aspects of parenthood and child rearing. Children's ability to relate to parents, to love, to grow, to learn, stuff like that. So that it's an intensely emotionally laden experience. But because it's so new, there's just a tremendous amount of variation. And the sad truth of this is that there isn't anybody who really knows what kinds of things cause it and what kinds of things work best for it. Everyone has opinions. The American Psychiatric Association thought they would help things by simplifying it and calling it autism spectrum. And the main thing it did was to create a whole lot of stuff to argue about. So anyway, it's a condition with heavy demands, intense emotions, information overload, inadequate social and public service supports. And so I'm delighted that we're having a meeting like this. We really need it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's great. I wanted to just maybe share a little bit more about the progress that's been made over the years and where we are today.
Oh, okay. Progress for me. I'm a retired medical school professor, and when I was growing up, the most interesting thing in the world was biology. So, from my standpoint, there has been breathtaking progress. Two things. One is new technology, brain imaging, and there's a whole new area of science that's developed. It's called bioengineering or systems biology, epigenetics. It's now possible to take the symptoms of autism and the metabolic characteristics and stuff like that and stick them all in a big computer and develop mathematical formulae, which that kind of thing really helps in terms of mentioning that it's mostly a genetic thing. That's simply not true. It's at least equally genetics and environment, because the whole function of the genes is to adapt to our environment. And there is so much going on in the environment that we simply we're not yet aware of. So anyway, that's the positive side. autism neuroscience has moved away from the medical schools and university departments, and now it's places like MIT and Caltech where all of the new research is happening, and that's really quite exciting. For those interested, there's a new multi-million-dollar program happening. It's called BRAIN. BRAIN is an acronym that means Brain Research Through Advancing Innovative Technology. And if you put all those first things together, you get BRAIN. Check it out on the internet. It is really interesting. Okay, now the negative side. The big one is, I used to think in 5 or 10 years we would have, cures, effective treatments, things like that. The way it looks to me now, things are so incredibly complex that I really do not think in the lifetime of our current generation of kids we're going to see effective treatments. And that's something that I really want everybody to think hard about, because it's something I'm afraid we're going to have to live with. The other aspect, before we can really get around to a lot of progress, is some of the problems. One is this new social phenomenon thing, with nobody knowing quite what to do, and the fact that the psychiatrist messed it up. Even if something that really aggravates me, if you think about what the psychiatric labeling is for autism, it has to do with children who are unable to relate and unable to communicate. That is just simply unreal. If you're the parent of an autistic child, you know perfectly well they like to relate, and they're lovable. But that's not part of the official establishment. And since I'm a professor of child psychiatry and I know a whole lot of psychiatrists all over the country, there are a lot of people that think the way I do. I'm not just a voice spoken. But there's something about institutionalizing, attempting to clarify, pin down whatever autism is that's driving everybody crazy. So another problem is, whenever you've got something that you don't know the cause and you don't know the treatment, and the definitions are vague and stuff like that, is it leads to a lot of splintering. Splintering of opinions, splintering of ideas, actually splintering of combined efforts. And one of the things that I most hope that we can talk about is the creation of a effective autism community here in Hawaii. Some states have done that, and it's very powerful. We're a fairly new state, and we haven't got there yet. Okay, I think that's it.
Thank you, Dr. Bolman. One of the things that Dr. Bolman alluded to was the fact of the spectrum, and why the complexity exists is because we have these cookie cutter definitions where our kids may or may not fit. And early on in working with autism, someone had said to me, well, you meet one individual with autism, you've met one individual with autism. And so, kind of understanding that the spectrum concept of it, really is a challenge with being able to early identify autism, seeing it, understanding it. So earlier this year, in about May, the Federal Maternal Child Health Bureau established a bar for a community standard. They're calling it the 2-3-4 plan, that all children would be identified and screened by age 2, that they would have further evaluation for a definitive diagnosis by age 3, and that they would actively be receiving services by age 4. Now think about what the 2, 3, and 4-year-olds look like, and think about this spectrum that Dr. Bolman has described, and what kids typically go through with development. It's really kind of hard to imagine how you might pick it up and find it. So what we would like to do this morning is to share with you some firsthand experiences about autism, in particular identifying from a parent perspective, what it was like, how'd you pick it up, how'd you find it? And so for that, we've asked our second panelist today, Kiele Pennington. Kiele is an incredible mother, as well as an advocate. She's a director for TACA, the Talk About Curing Autism Now, the Hawaii chapter, and is just, when I first met her several years ago, her child had been recently diagnosed, but one of her priorities, besides her children, her family, her husband, her life, was making sure that other families out there received information and support. And to me, that was just incredible. And just knowing that's part of her makeup makes her just such a welcome guest to our panel today. So I'd like to ask Kiele, because she's got a very unique family situation. When families get together and we talk story, we see so much of ourselves and each other's family stories. So I'd like Kiele to share with us, about the how she began her first journey in autism, especially looking at that early diagnosis or early identification and diagnosis.
So we were lucky. We have an older son who's 17 now. His name is Alkai, and he's neurotypical. In our autism community, we call children who have no diagnosis neurotypical rather than calling them normal. So he's neurotypical, and our daughter is 9.5, and her name is Kiele, and she has severe autism. She's non-vocal, and she signs. And then we have our younger son who's 8, and I can talk about his journey a little more later. So we were lucky when we had Alkai that we got to see all the typical milestones in development and experience parenthood that way. And so when we had Kiele, I could compare the difference, which I think was a valuable experience for me as a mother. So early on, she was having trouble bonding and having trouble nursing and having trouble eating. And by 6 months, she wasn't sitting, she wasn't cooing. She was basically laying on her back. And so I asked the doctor to give us a recommendation to early intervention. And he said, oh, she's fine, she'll be okay, she'll catch up. And I said, no, I don't think something's different. I can't bond with her. And so he gave us a recommendation, and we went to early intervention and started at 7 months. And she got all her therapies, and it was in the house, and it was every week. And it was a great experience. We worked with an amazing PT who, in hindsight, used a really great behavioral approach with Kiele, and she met her milestones, her 1 year goals in 6 months. And so we saw progress. We saw she could learn, and so I kept asking, why? What are we doing? Why? What does she have? What's her diagnosis? And we couldn't get an answer. And the physical therapist from early intervention was very honest, and she said, we haven't seen children like Kiele. And so it just persisted over time, and we kept asking and asking, and it went on for a long time, and we couldn't find anyone who had seen a child like Kiele. So fast forward to the end of early intervention, and we were exiting, and we got to see a psychologist, and she finally said, your daughter has PDD-NOS. And I thought, oh yeah, I know she's delayed. Like, that's what we've been doing all this time. And I wanted to believe she was going to catch up. I wanted to believe that this was going to be done by age 5, that we would do all this intensive intervention and she would be okay. But as the years went by, our life started changing. We had said, oh, we're going to wait 2 years and have, our 3rd child. And then we were like, wow, this isn't going away. We better hang on and wait. So things like that, it was starting to change our lifestyle. Then I heard about the Rainbow Book, and a family member said, you gotta go, just go. And so I met Leo, and I met another parent, and she stopped me in the parking lot and said, you said your child had PDD-NOS. I said, yeah, she's delayed. And she said, she has autism. And I said, no, she doesn't. She has PDD-NOS. And she said, no, she has autism. Stop saying that today. And it was shocking, and I was like, how dare you tell me that my kid has autism? And that was the first time somebody was just brutally honest, and I went home and looked it up, and then another mother called me. We had moved to Maui by then. It's a small community, and another mother called and said, I heard you have autism, I'm coming to your house tomorrow. And I was like, what is this lady doing? She's coming to my house, she's coming to see my kid. And she came in and she sat down and she said, okay, you have autism. and you need to go see this person, and then you need to do this and this. And my husband and I were shocked, and we were like, okay, let's just do that. Like, that's easier. And she's telling me to do something. And that really put us on our path to finding answers. We found out about Kiele's sensory needs, and being connected to other parents that had walked the same path. So then I started looking like, there's got to be something out there. Luckily, I ended up flying to California a few times, and Kiele got her diagnosis at age 5 from UCLA Medical Center. And honestly, for us, that was the happiest day of our life. We got the diagnosis, and we were like, oh my gosh, we have something to work with now. And, you know, up till that point, you know, other people in the community, and this goes all the way back. You know, I have a great relationship with her early intervention physical therapist, and we've kept in contact, and she kept saying, after we saw Kiele, we were able to look at other kids and know that this was autism, and to be able to know what kind of treatments they were going to respond to. So getting her diagnosis at 5 was difficult, and it was a hard lesson, and after that I was just determined that other families didn't wait as long as we did to find out what type of treatments were effective, and to get on the path that other parents had walked already, and to get moving.
So, you know, again, thinking about how this doesn't fit what our idea is, and that idea may come from books, movies, TV, classroom of what autism is, but in your home, that wasn't the picture that you were seeing. So tell us again, how did that affect you as a parent when you had your next child, having this awareness about development, and when you mentioned PDD, pervasive developmental disorder, basically the trajectories for development can differ amongst the domains and may vary among children.
So we had been lucky to learn a lot from early intervention and from the professionals that we had sought. And so a lot of the therapy included us doing it at home, and my husband was very open to it, so we would alternate schedules, and he would learn and I would learn. And I think my younger son was 8 at that time, and so because we were doing it in the home, he was learning. So not only were we learning, my son was learning, and we were using the interventions in play, you know, throughout the week. So we had experienced a lot with regulation and behavioral, and so when we had our third son, he seemed fine, you know. It was just balancing 3 children now, but then the markers weren't coming as well. He was having a little bit of a social delay. It wasn't the same. Again, I was always measuring back to the neurotypical child, and he wasn't quite the same. He would cry much more often. He couldn't regulate. He couldn't, he needed things that our typical kid didn't need. And so I started using a lot of the interventions that had been taught to me to help teach him to regulate. So a lot of behavioral techniques with him, with dealing with some problem behaviors, which was really mild. It was crying, and he couldn't separate from me. And then really working on communication. He had a delay until he was 4, and he didn't speak till he was 4. And then when he started speaking, it was full sentences. But for him, we started early, and by 2, he was in early intervention, receiving speech, receiving OT, and while he's been mild in what he seems to present with on the spectrum, he still needed intense intervention from us, and we did the intervention. So it was a constantly managing what kind of symptoms he was showing and making sure I was meeting it and getting over it. So for example, at one point he decided, you know, hand washing was very important, and he had to hand wash constantly, and I was like, no, that's not going to happen. Or, you know, sensitivity to walking on grass. So because I had learned that, we started intervening early, and now he's almost undiagnosable on the spectrum.
Thank you. So imagine 3 children, family, different areas of development, different strengths. You know, how does a family do you work towards trying to meet everybody's needs?
The kids would say, no, I don't, no. I think what I've learned over time is, you know, you see moms a lot in the autism community, and we're really strong. And then, for us, volunteering was important, so people see me, and they don't see my husband a lot. And he really made everything possible for me to learn and help my kids, and then to be here and help other families. So I always say that he's a huge part of our family, and I think that's important, is keeping the balance between the parents, and talking about our roles in the family, what everybody's roles are, what we need from everybody. So the kids are really clear about what I need them to do for me, and they're very clear about, daddy being as much a participant as mom is. And I think I've been lucky that all the kids have gotten used to our lifestyle. We've kind of embraced this as our lifestyle. I don't think at this point, even our neurotypical son will say, I can't imagine living without autism. Like, it's great. We do great. Everybody's quirky here. And we just kind of roll with it all the time. But having those, and being clear about what everybody's needs are, and then between my husband and I, there's a lot of times when I have, you get that mama bear kind of like, no, I know what I'm doing, and being able to defer to him and let him make decisions when the time comes, and knowing how to balance what our priorities are within the family. So saying, now we're going to focus on this person because they need this, and everybody else is going to be there to support that one person. And then in a couple months, in a couple weeks, it may switch, and we've got to all of us be there to support the next person. So we work really hard, and we're very open, and we communicate about priorities and needs, and it's a whole family thing. I think that's been important, to keep the whole family involved in everybody's activities, no matter what it is.
Thank you. I'd like to transition our discussion to talk about another characteristic of the autism spectrum. In particular, that we know that autism can occur with other conditions. About 10% of our individuals with autism may have another genetic or chromosomal disorder. We also know that commonly co-occurrences exist with other diagnoses, including developmental, psychiatric, neurologic diagnoses. In those situations where there may be a co-occurring condition, identifying autism may not be as easy, and it really just adds another level of complexity in understanding and supporting the individual. So to kind of give you a taste of what that would look like, we'd like to introduce you our next panelist, Laurie Kahiapo. Laurie is an incredible, all these words, right, incredible mom. Dr. Bolman talks about this phenomenon. Can I just steal your story about moms of children with autism are all super moms, they carry the cape, right? They break it out, and Laurie is one of the cape-wearing mamas, from a community leader from the Windward side, and she and her family have mobilized their extended family to really understand and embrace autism, much in the way that Kiele has described, as well as their community and their community partners in their outreach, as well as sharing and autism awareness throughout their larger community. So we'd like Laurie, who's been joining us with her husband Kawika, and together they'll be sharing their family perspectives, to kind of tell us a little bit about Jeremiah's story starting before day one, before his early arrival, and what the family was focusing around that time.
Thank you. I'm first of all so honored and humbled to be with these wonderful people that are my heroes and share stories. Before Jeremiah came along, by the way, he was born in 1990, the year that no one knew what that word meant. And we at that time had an 11-year-old son and an 8-year-old daughter, Dalen and Shauna, and we were a homeschooling family. Things were just rolling along. When I had Jeremiah, I actually was notified when he was in my womb that there was going to be some kind of problem with this pregnancy. We took some tests, and they asked me to come back for ultrasounds, and at that point I was about 12 weeks along and got the phone call telling us that he has a severe abnormality. it's a spina bifida form called encephalocele. And never heard those words. The next sentence was, we're recommending you come right down and have him aborted. It was a very, very tough day, needless to say, when we got that phone call. I want to just share that the support started immediately. We called my father, my mother, his family. We were just in shock, praying together, gathering our children, trying to figure out what to do next. Within, I would say, 2.5 to 3 hours, there was a knock at the door. My father had jumped on the next plane from Kauai and come over to spend the time with us and to pray with us and encourage us. And, just back up whatever decisions we did make. It was, I think, that very day or the day after when my husband got a word in his spirit, and he said, honey, it's a boy. His name is Jeremiah. And I said, how do you know this? And maybe you can share.
So we got the news that he was in the womb, had a neural tube defect. So we gathered the family, we started to pray, and I opened up Bible, and I was like, wow, you got to give me some kind of word, man. And opened up the Bible to book of Genesis chapter 1, and the scripture jumped out to me that God knew him in the womb. So the book was Jeremiah chapter 1. I had never read that context prior to that, or maybe have, but I just grabbed it, opened it. That's a chapter that was looking at me. And so it started a journey, first of all, for us on that early part of his life was going through the continued prenatal stuff and struggling with her cousin, who was our pediatrician, telling us, you don't know what you're dealing with, it's going to be and anyway, so we decided to continue with the pregnancy, and surprisingly at birth, she had a C-section. I was busy talking to some guy in the hallway, and they called me in, and she was already had gone through the process of pulling the baby out. To our surprise, his APGAR scores was like 9s and 10s, so physically, and he was like perfect. What happened was it was just a little sac that was hanging out the back of his head, and so apparently what they had diagnosed before wasn't actually what happened. And so Jeremiah continued to develop and grow normally. We have videos of him today at our house in Laie. I'd be singing with my ukulele, and he'd be singing along, and just eye contact, just everything was just spot on. And then we realized at some point something happened. And so that moment when we realized something happened and he started to change for us, at the time, 1990, then at about 4 or 5 years old, we started to notice a change. At a time when we felt like, we know now that there wasn't as much advocacy for autism. And so everywhere we went, people were like, what is that? But as time has gone on, and we've, the statistics have gone from like 1 in 8,000 to like 1 in 50, I think now. And so we definitely see that the awareness is out there because of how much it has escalated. And so I think being able to come and join in with other families and agencies and people who are giving more detailed focus to care and help. And maybe I'm talking too long. My wife said it's her turn.
I said to tell about Jeremiah's name. No, that's okay. He's used to being on stage and I'm not, but I'm a little nervous. Anyway, so yeah, Jeremiah came forth. He did really well. At about 1 month of age, though, he did develop hydrocephalus and was VP shunted, meaning that the fluid is internally drained from his brain area, from his into his abdomen, and started with the 0 to 3 program from birth, which was, it was expected for him to have delays. So as we watched him develop, though, there were very few delays. He was, like he said, on the low end of the normal spectrum, until that day when we just suddenly noticed something was very different. It almost happened immediately, and it started with auditory sensitivities and the loss of contact, the regression, I should say, from his normal skills. And at that time, he was about nearly 3 years old, so it would have been about 1993. We were doomed, like we didn't know where to turn to. We noticed this, we told our doctor, we told his case manager, we told his team, and there really was a puzzled look on everyone's face, saying, well, these things are to be expected, you know, with his abnormality. But we just said, no, something's really different, very, very different. And I'm sure you know what that sounds like. We sent him off to a preschool, which they normally do if you're in a 0 to 3 program. And because of his tantrums, and I could see the uncertainty on the teacher's face and the EA's faces, we only sent him about an hour a day so I could just spend a little bit of time doing errands and things I needed to do, because I could see from what they were dealing with that they too had really no clue what to do with him. And it saddened me that I would have to send him to some place that also was clueless like us, and I would prefer to have him at home to try to figure this out and not burden them the rest of the classroom and things like that. So for about 2.5 years, we were, like Kiele, wondering what is going on. Until one of my case managers came up with a piece of paper, and she said, as she left my home, read this real quick, you know, and dropped a piece of paper. And I thought, she looked a little nervous, you know, and I looked at it, and it was every symptom that we seem to be dealing with. And it had this word, autism. And I said, we got the answer. We know what this is it. This is him. We know it. And we were so relieved to have a name put to the behaviors, and we weren't crazy. From there, though, when we called her and said, this is it, you know, unfortunately, the diagnosing came very, very slow. Very, very, very slow. We didn't get a diagnosis till it was nearly 6, and the information was even slower, and the help. People really, back then, did not know what to do with him. Very well-meaning people, extremely caring, like us, very confused. So our years were spent on the internet, really. I had a sister at the time, I have a sister, her name is Beth, and she's, her PhD is in psychology, and she too knew very little. And she tried to help point me in whatever directions, and that's where we started.
Thank you. So you've kind of heard these snapshots, right? Lack of information, and you know, I see today we have some very young families with us today with newly diagnosed children, and you know, you have benefited much from the opportunities that we as families have come before you to have, and then the next generation that will come will have increased opportunities. But you know, just the whole thing about having too much information now, right? We had no information back then. Now we have too much information. So how is it that families begin to think about assessing options and treatments and services and meeting the total needs of the child? And how do we maintain balance with the family and, you know, putting it all together? So at this time, I want to just bring this back to Dr. Bolman. And, you know, just his comment earlier about, well, you know, the interventions that may or may not work, right? So we know there's a lot of evidence that supports that there's not one thing, that there are many things, there are an array of interventions and strategies to support individuals, that over time they may vary by intensity, frequency, location, depending on the child, the situation, and the context, right? And so, you know, in thinking about this, right, so we all look for what is the treatment du jour. But, you know, beyond that, the better skill is how do we assess what's available to determine what's right. So if you can kind of, Dr. Bolman, kind of guide us in that. Do you have any guiding principles that you would recommend for families in kind of looking at the array and the continuing of services to kind of pick the right ones?
Okay. I think listening to both of you guys, it just makes it very clear that the center of working with autistic children has simply got to be the family. You know, professionals are interesting people, and some of them know something. But they don't know your child. They don't know how he sleeps, the way he thinks, the kinds of things that upset him. So that I think all treatment programs need to be centered in the family. And I would personally like it if the family sort of took over, you know, and they called the shots instead of, you know, kind of getting on their hands and knees and saying, oh, you knowledgeable people, maybe, you know, stuff. All three of you guys know more than... anyway, so that's number one, family. Principle number two, which this is incredibly simple if you think about it, is communication. The brain works differently, and when the brain works differently, kids sense it differently, they focus on different things, they put them together differently. So they have misunderstandings and language problems. Now, when that happens to grown-ups, we don't have a big problem with that. We you know, repeat back or ask them to say it again. Worst comes to worst, we get a translator, somebody who can help. With children, we simply don't, it doesn't occur to us to do that. We expect that they're going to understand us, and if they don't, something's wrong with them. So the first thing to do about communication and a family raising children is to get on the child's wavelength. Find out the kind of things that they like, they don't like, they cannot handle, stuff like that. And then work with that. Because one of the things that I run into all the time, I mean, like even yesterday, is families are neurotypical. The people with the high-functioning ASCII people call neurotypicals tips. And it's a word like nigger or Jap or Jew. It's a dirty word because high-functioning autistic people discover that there are all these neurotypical people that's like they're a different ethnic group. They think differently. And so in the course of growing up, autistic kids have an awful lot of failure. And when you fail too many times, you start to give up. One of the main functions of aggression in autistic children is they're trying to get our attention. It's not that they're trying to be aggressive. But we get sidetracked and we think about them as the problem and their aggression and stuff like that. Okay, so family and wavelength are the two. A lot of that has to do with this sort of like demystifying autism. That autistic children are not all that weird or different, or, you know, they're just simply, their brains work differently, but otherwise they're lovable. They're ours, for crying out loud. I don't know that I need to mention sensory vulnerability and
Oh, go for it,
all
Phil.
that stuff like that. Yeah. Okay, good enough.
Okay. So, you know, we hear stories about families who've had to seek bankruptcy because they've paid for, you know, types of treatment, or, you know, that there are some that are aversive. You know, so some of the recommendations that typically we hear are about if it's harmful, probably not something you want to consider, right? But, you know, for something that's not harmful, Dr. Bolman, do you have any recommendation as far as trying things out, for how long, some of those kinds of things?
The first thing I would do is I'd recommend the newest book out called The Autism Revolution. It's written by a professor of neurology at Harvard Medical School, a wonderful woman named Martha Herbert. And one of the really nice things that Dr. Herbert does is look at autism as a whole body condition, and that's actually where all of the research is. It's not simply a brain condition. It affects the immune system. It affects the gastrointestinal system. It just affects every aspect of your life. And that's another reason why I say parents are so important, because it's parents that are in intimate contact with things like that.
Okay.
The other thing that's talking about family and getting on your kid's wavelength and stuff like that is that the early behavior interventions, the discrete trial training and all of those ABA things, mostly were things that so-called experts did to children. You know, the idea of finding out what kids like and what they're interested in and how to get their attention and their motivation, it didn't dawn on us way back then. People would set up special rooms with just a chair and a desk and sit the child down, do this, do this, do this. That whole thing is now changing. The idea of getting their attention and their motivation, and they want to work with you and make it rewarding and playful and stuff like that. People are now beginning to do that. And one of the best, I think the most modern that's doing that, it's called PRT, which means Pivotal Response Training. There are just certain responses that you can use in many, many situations, is why they call it that way. Anyway, it's a small paperback called PRT Handbook. And the authors are Professor and Professor Kogel, K-O-E-G-E-L. They're in Santa Barbara, California.
So I'll ask the families, what recommendations do you have for professionals or other family members on how to begin to kind of assess and, try different things? Just kind of rules of thumb that you might recommend to families or other professionals. And we'll start with the families and come back to you.
So you're going to let me get on my soapbox. This is my soapbox for everybody. So there's three things I think families really need to know, and I say this quite often at TACA meetings and to parents, is number one, they need to know about autism. So they need to know what autism, how it's defined, how it's diagnosed, what it means for your child. And I like to see what other people's children look like. I want to know what the spectrum looks like. I want to know how it presents in your child versus my child. And it helps me to speak about my child's needs and explain who she is. I think it's so important to see the spectrum, and for myself, being able to see the spectrum from Asperger's to low-functioning autism in our own house, I can see how they can have the same spectrum, the same diagnosis, and just be two totally different people. They can both have regulation issues, and I see it coming out in this way with one and coming out in a totally different way with another, but both needing intervention. So I really encourage families and professionals to see the spectrum and understand the spectrum of needs, understand the spectrum of treatments that are available, and what is evidence-based and research-based. For me, it meant going to see what these places look like. I remember when I first was learning about autism, and I saw CARD put out their research study and watched the video, and I watched them do ABA with a girl, and I thought, oh my gosh, that's exactly how my child would learn. And I remember it was a seminar, and I left the seminar crying, thinking, how am I going to get that for my child? So I think it's so valuable to go and see what treatments look like, and then knowing your own child. So secondly, knowing your child. And my husband and I always thought, we know our child. We go through life every day with her. And somebody said, then write down everything she does or you do, identify what she can do. And so we sat there that night with the paper at dinner, and we were like, we feed her. And we looked at each other and we were like, why are we feeding her? Why aren't we teaching her to eat at dinner like we're teaching we teach the other kids? And we forgot because we got in habits of doing things. So I think it's so important to take the time to identify exactly what we start doing without thinking about it, because we're living it and we're trying to get by each day. And I think as professionals, it helps for you to remind us to do these things, to take the time to write it down, to tell your story on paper. And we kind of go through this exercise between us every so often, my husband and I, like, wait, what are we doing again? Like, why are we doing that? Are we helping or are we hurting? Not hurting, holding back. And then understanding how everything works is my third thing with parents. And this is really tough, and it takes time to go learn how the insurance works and how to get services. And autism is a train wreck. And I remember when the first mother came to help me, and she said, nobody's coming to bring you dinners. Nobody's going to feel bad for you. You've got to do this. And she kept saying, I'm here to help you. And I was like, wow, that was a reality check. She's like, this is not like your child has an illness and everybody's going to understand and feel bad and cook for you and come here and watch your child. Like, it's you, it's only you. And that really woke me up, and I realized that she was my support system, and every time I was upset, I called her and she was there, even if it was 2 minutes or an hour. And then I became her support system. So I encourage families to find other families. And it's funny because when I'll meet a new family, I'll say, call me anytime. And I really mean that, call me anytime. And they don't call me, and I call them, and I'm like, how are you doing? And they're like, it's so hard. And I'm like, why didn't you call me? I really meant that. And so I think connecting families with other parents is really going to be a huge support for parents. I've said it, and not to be disrespectful, I've said the people that understand what living this life is are going to be other parents. I mean, Laurie and I know she understands my whole life already just sitting here. So I really encourage you to encourage families to find that support with other families.
I especially want to echo her last statement. It is true. Really, no one understands what you go through except other families, and the craziness and the unpredictability. But it is also important for us, our immediate families, the providers we have, our spiritual family was very, very, very important for us. They were like there to hold us up all the time when we needed it. I think also one big piece of advice we got when Jeremiah was just diagnosed was to really see him and love him and accept him right where he's at. Progress or not, he needs to know that he is loved and accepted right where he's at. Even though you're confused, you're lost, I don't know where he's at, it's okay. Love and accept, and make sure your child knows that. Because from there, every bit of progress is a celebration, whether teeny tiny, which we do mostly see teeny tiny progress, or none at all. It doesn't matter. Your child still feels loved and accepted. And that really freed us from looking at him and worrying, okay, he should be doing this, he should be doing that. Oh my gosh, he's not doing this, he's not doing that. No, love him, accept your child just where your child is at. I think that was a real turning point for us. We actually had some friends that came alongside us and really understood that and helped us to be that circle to understand and love and accept him when none of us really knew what was happening. And that was really important. Also, your providers, I think it's really important to find providers that click with your child and your family. We've been through a whole lot of different providers, and I would say that that is so important. I can't say enough. We have one provider that started coming when he was young. She's now, she has her PhD now in psychology. She was like a skills trainer back then, one of our first ones that used to come in the home. And you know, she was learning with us, but there was such a click there that it just worked. It worked. And it helped move things along when there's a great connection with your child, the provider, and the family. Through the years, there's been many situations where the environment has to really play a big part in your child's progress. And if that child feels like it is an environment where he can grow or she can grow, and they're okay.
Dr. Bolman, you want to add, would you like to add something to the?
No,
Okay.
no, there's absolutely nothing that I could add.
Well, I got the mic in my hand now, so.
Okay,
So many thoughts running through my mind. From the parent's point of view, it's 24/7, I guess. You have to be informed. You have to be constantly seeking, searching, asking. The word spectrum, I guess for most, probably all parents, who the hope is, you know, to be able to rescue their child. I guess the only way I can put it is success and attrition. As a parent, you observe what goes on around you, like whether it's a movie you saw or something you read or a piece you saw on the internet about some child being diagnosed, this behavior modification applied or diet change, then they go from like nonverbal to like practically, you know, going back to their neurotypical peers in school. And so you watch and you hope the best, and you know, and then reality sinks in, and then you start to realize the spectrum is so huge. But I've been noticing that since 1995 or so, seeing the approach of young professionals and young caregivers who, I guess, take it upon themselves. My wife and I have seen absolutely amazing people just get it, just go like, wow, I was wanting to do this career or that career, but having seen what autism is all about, you know, just kind of like accepting the challenge to help find answers. And so I guess as a parent, I just want to say that constant information, upload, download, exchanging, talking, sharing. Some good friends of ours, Don and Julianne King, at some point in their life, she's been a real pioneer for autism, and so in her journey of going to conferences and learning and sharing information with us, you know, the whole thing is like finances, continuing to work. Luckily, we're blessed. My wife was, we made a commitment that she would hopefully stay home as much as possible, not have to work. But for Don and Julianne, at some point in their campaign, they needed more money, and the money was to help them to get the awareness out through a movie that Don was making for his son, Bo. Some of you may have or may not have seen that movie, Beautiful Son. You guys got to see that movie. So anyway, Don and Julianne King. So they led the charge. And so I'll close with this. Professionally, you start to, I guess, gather information and the team of people that I feel like will help you professionally. And then on the domestic side, honest to God, some heroes will come out on the domestic side that'll be like your knight in shining armor. Like we have friends in our church, in our families, extended friends who have taken upon themselves, basically, I'm not trained, I'm not a professional, but I'll be there and I'll love your son unconditionally, you know? And it's been just really awesome to have the spectrum of different individuals in our life come up and step up to the plate and actually say, you know, we're here for you. You know, hang out, take Jerry to the beach, play with him, cook us a dinner once in a while, give my wife some respite. So anyway, so we placed Jeremiah in a home last November, and my number one hoorah for that was after 22 years, my wife has a little respite. So